Welcome back, friends. And I mean, we've got a lot going on M Go Blue podcast. Some of it we can share with you, some of it still in the works. So no teasers right now, unless you're going to call that the tease. Hey, we're in full effect. We've had Bonnie Thal on Conquering Heroes, and they are off and running a great weekend for Michigan softball. Michigan baseball gets going this weekend with the number 2 team in the country. And so we're excited about that. We're going to have more coming to you around everything that's getting going or continuing from winter to spring on Conquering Heroes, and the basketball team's rocking and rolling. A big week for them. But right now, I think we're going to jump right into it. And I want to bring in my partner, Mr. Brian Boesch. Brian, I know you've been a busy man, but how you doing?
Doing great, fired up. It's a big time around the athletic department, around campus. Yeah, excited about what we're hopeful to have for Thursday's episode of Conquering Heroes, but we can't say anything yet. Sworn to secrecy here today, but hey, we figured it's time. We're in the middle of February. Super Bowl's come and gone. First 12-team college football playoff done. We got a little ways to go until football returns. So let's break down the Wolverines. We start with the offensive scouting report. And again, it is contractually obligated when we talk anything around the offense to start up front. That is 497 episodes now into this. I must start there, John Jansen. Let's talk about the tackles to get things going. Miles Hinton, gone. Evan Link, who played most of the reps at right tackle this season, he comes back for his redshirt sophomore year. Couple of highly touted second-year guys who I know you're excited about. Andrew Sprague, who we saw start in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Alabama. Blake Frazier, former 4-star recruit entering year 2 in Ann Arbor. Plus a couple of pretty highly regarded recruits in this class. Most recently, we don't see a lot of February signings anymore, but Ty Haywood locked in last week. Upside feels high. Proven talent, proven production isn't quite there. How do you size things up at the offensive tackle spots?
Well, and Andrew Babaloa, who's an early enrollee, another 5-star kid that was signed in the early period. So there's a lot to be excited about for where this offensive line is going, especially from the tackle position. And you talk about Sprague, we saw him in the bowl game. We saw him at different times throughout the course of the year, but he's a kid who's 6'7", 6'8", right? And that's where I think this offensive line really where I would like to see it. And there's the size there now. And I talk about the length, the reach that the offensive tackles have. And when you're talking about a kid who's 6'7" or 6'8", when they take their slide, their kick steps on pass protection, you're instantly going to be a little bit wider, a little bit deeper with somebody that just has that type of length and the arm length as well. It keeps everybody at bay. So the tackles are always supposed to keep the width of the pocket. And run guy, if it's a 7-step drop, hey, you run them at 10 feet or at 10 yards deep, and you've got a great pocket. The guards and centers, who we'll talk about in just a few minutes, they handle the depth of that pocket. So to have a guy like Sprague with that length, and Blake Frazier as well, to have guys walking around here that I'm not looking down on anymore. I'm either looking eye to eye or I may even have to look up to a little bit. That's really nice to have. And then you think about the athleticism and you talk about those guys that are just, either an early enrollee or they're going to be here this summer. Really excited. I ran into Babaloa the other day, and I tell you what, he is a guy, only played 2 years of football. And we talked about this on signing day, right? But he was a basketball player, a basketball recruit. So, he's an athlete. So you've got instant athleticism at that position as well. And I'll tell you what, he is a guy, after he spent about 6 months or so down in the weight room, he's one of those that you want him to get off the bus first. He's one of the first ones off the plane. And so I like just the size that we're going to have at that position. I like the length at that position. I like the athletic ability at position. And when you talk about Evan Link, I think ultimately now we're talking about a guy who's going into his 3rd year. So this is further down the road. He did a tremendous job of going in there and playing left tackle against some pretty good rushers against Alabama. To make that transition from right to left, I thought that was nice. To be able to hold up against that pass rush and to be able to run the ball a little bit against Alabama was nice. I think eventually he projects more to a guard. And I say that by talking about those guys that we just mentioned. A little more athleticism, a little more size, a little more length. They ultimately, I don't know if they start the season out as a starting tackle, but eventually if two of those four end up taking over those tackle positions and you've got good depth there, now maybe that's when you do bump a guy like Evan Link inside, because that's ultimately where I think he projects through the rest of his career is as a guard. So you've got talent, you get size, you get speed, you got all those different things. So I like where it's headed. The only thing you don't have other than Evan Link is experience. You're not going to have a lot of experience at that position. It's going to be a learn on the job sort of scenario. So it'll just be interesting to see through this offseason. Grant Newsome, the job is to develop these guys. You've got the talent, you've got the stars. Now it's how do you take them from, raw to refined? How long does that take? What's the process look like before you get there? And how quickly can you get there? That's going to be the question. And I'm excited about spring ball.
For number 2, let's go on the interior. More experience there with fifth year's Giovanni El Hadi, who was the right guard last year after waiting his turn a while as a depth piece for the line. And then Greg Crippen took over as the starting center after a platoon early in the year by about mid to late October. How can Crippen and El Hadi take that next step forward? And who else do you have in mind at the left guard spot if that is as wide open as we feel it probably will be?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do with Gio. Because we've seen him play both spots, and a few years ago, he was the one that went in at left guard, and I kind of feel like he was more comfortable now, smaller sample size than we saw this year at right guard. There might be a world where they move him over to left guard, and then obviously Cripp at center, and he'll be pushed. The job is his to basically do with what he wants, and how is he going to develop. And I see these guys in here every day at the football office, and they're on the field. They're working with, whether it's, an assistant coach in Grant Newsome or Juan Castillo, who's been brought in. There's a lot of different guys that have experience that are able to work with them. But the message is they are putting in as much time as they possibly can on the field, especially some of the old guys. Yeah, they need to be in the weight room. They need to be doing all those things, and they are. But it's about, I mentioned it with the tackles. How quickly can get to that refined, player that you need to be at the center position, because it's not always technique there. That's going to be the key at all 5 of the positions. But for him, it's about identifying defenses. When you can get into a room with Juan Castillo and watch film, when you could do it with Grant Newsome, you do it with your line mates. Now all of a sudden you have all of these different exposures and different eyeballs and different, viewpoints to refine. When you see a defense, how are we identifying it? Who's the Mike? Who's the Will? Who's the Sam? And whatever terminology they're using these days, because defenses are all whacked at this point. So there's a lot of that going on. And that's why you need to be, whether it's on the field, in the weight room, or in the meeting rooms watching film, it's really that important. And I think Cripp will do that. And he's going to bring guys like, Jake Warnera, who is waiting in the wings, and a young player like a Caden Strayhorn, who we know was a highly recruited guy, comes in with a lot of athleticism, played at the IMG Academy down in Florida. And he's a guy that I think could develop into not just a center, but a guy that could back up all 3 spots early on in his career. And that's really what it's going to entail.
In recent seasons, we've seen the experience, the age of this Michigan offensive line be one of the tops in the country. I don't know a likely scenario where that's going to be exactly the same this year. There will be at least 1 or 2 and maybe more young pieces on this group, guys who don't have 4 or 5 years of offensive line experience. Does that excite you?
Oh, that's the beauty of college football, and especially in the world that we live in right now. And you're talking about, well, what transfers can come in and help? Well, you don't always have to get transfers. And we talked to, the general manager last week, Sean McGee, about recruiting guys and developing them. And that's kind of, I think it's going to become a lost art. Michigan has the ability right now, because of the freshman class that's coming in this year, because of the freshmen that are going to be sophomores next year, very talented players that will be able to develop. And what excites me is, while they don't have the experience, and again, I said this is college football, you're always going to have guys that are, hopefully you recruit, develop, and then they go on to the NFL. And we've seen that through the past 5 years. We've also seen guys this year leave through the transfer portal. So you always have to be able to have guys that you're continuing to develop, and you never know from year to year. We're talking about the offensive line. You could be talking about any position on the football field where guys are going to graduate, guys are going to leave, guys are, for whatever reason, and you've got to be ready for what's next. And I'm excited about the level of talent that this offensive line has, especially at the tackle position, in regards to just athleticism, length, all of that stuff. But this offensive line is going to have a lot of young players, and whatever they don't have in experience, I do think that they're going to be able to make up for in just athletic ability and overall talent.
Yeah, I mean, even Michigan's second unit on the offensive line the last few years were filled with guys who had lengthy college time, maybe not a ton of experience, but they were older dudes. It feels like at the very least, Michigan's second unit's going to have some unique youth and maybe several first or second year guys. All right, number 3 on our 7 from 77. Colston Loveland, soon to be, in my estimation, and in many others, a first-round pick in a couple of months. He leaves, yet we've talked about this since the middle of the season, that it feels like the tight end group has a chance to still be pretty darn impressive, even with, I think, the first or second tight end off the board in April's draft. Hogan Hansen seems primed for that breakout sophomore season. We've seen Marlon Klein earn significant snaps. We could throw Max Bredesen in several groups, even in the first 2 topics we had today. We could throw him in an offensive line. I think he'd hold his own. We'll put him here with his experience in year 5. Your thoughts on a fascinating and I think a pretty deep room?
It is a very deep room, and it's one that it's the most talented position that Michigan has right now, at least in terms of proven talent. Now, when we talk about the quarterback position and we talk about Underwood and all this, like we'll get there. And talent at different positions means different things. But this is one where, when you're looking at the tight end position, Marlon Klein, we've heard about his speed, and we talked to him last year, whether it was on the radio show or the podcast, about his development as a football player, coming over here to the States and learning the terminology, just learning to speak English with a little bit of a Southern accent, and learning the game of football. I believe he is there, and he's had a chance to watch some really good tight ends at that position. Obviously, the latest one being Colston Loveland, to figure out what it is that he needs to do to develop his game, whether it's as a run blocker or as a pass catcher, as a route runner. And I'm excited to see the next steps by Marlon Klein. But Hogan Hansen is a guy that came onto the scene this year. We saw with his first touchdown against USC, and throughout the course of the year, it just was used more and more, especially when Colston was a little bit banged up. The guy that they leaned on was Hogan Hansen. He's a guy that fit right in as a freshman to be able to set the edge. And I think he's a little further along than Colston was, or certainly Marlon Klein was, in the running game side of things. Now, can he be the pass catcher and the target that Colston Loveland was? He's definitely going to have time, and he'll have opportunity now to develop into that target for whoever the quarterback might be. And then another guy, Zach Marshall, who's going into his 3rd year, is another one that I think is going to be a breakout star, and could possibly, I don't think he's going to, leapfrog Hogan Hansen or even Marlon Klein, but can you imagine a world where we get in the red zone and you've got 3 targets that are all 6'5", 6'6", big bodies that you can use to position yourself? I like the matchups that in my mind, that it provides. So I'm excited about that tight end position, even though you're losing a guy that's going to go in the first round.
Yeah, Zach Marshall was somebody who on several instances, now former offensive coordinator Kirk Campbell raved about how Zach Marshall was a great teammate. He played through some injuries, was wearing that club on his hand and wrist. So, yeah, he's an interesting depth piece for this Michigan tight end group. Number 4 on our 7 from 77, wide receiver room. It feels pretty open like it did last year, and certainly Michigan needs more from its wide receivers. Year 3 for the likes of Samaj Morgan, Frederick Moore, who had that incredible catch in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Alabama. Also third year for Kendrick Bell. Donovan McCulley, the primary portal addition, did not play much for Indiana this past year, had a pretty good year in 2023 before Kurt Signetti showed up. Also, names we've heard before, Peyton O'Leary, Channing Goodwin, Amorion Walker, and their 3 true freshmen. So it feels like this is as cluttered, as unique as a position group Michigan has on the offense. How optimistic are you? How do you see this starting to shake out as we get into spring ball?
Well, a lot of the progress this year from the receiver position might just simply be that the ball is going to be in the air more. They're going to have more opportunity. They're going to have more looks. They're going to have more. And we'll get a chance to talk to Chip Lindsey, hopefully here in the next couple of weeks, about the offense and how he wants to, spread the ball around, not just be a run first team, but not just be a run based offense and open things up. So when guys are given the opportunity through routes to get open, now all of a sudden it gives them the opportunity and the confidence. There's an artwork to running routes, and to be able to have the confidence of, all right, this route, if I run it tight, I'm going to be open. Another one, especially on some of those go routes, and we've seen Fred Moore be open down the field. How is it best for me to get from point A to point B? I don't care how you do it. Receivers coaches aren't going to care how you do it, and there is rumor, because I can't announce it. It's not official, but there was a coach that was here when I played. It's coming from the MAC and is going to be on staff here as an assistant, much like I talked about Juan Castillo on the offensive line, for the receivers as well. And it's going to be another resource for these guys, just a person to bounce ideas off of, another set of eyeballs. And I really think that the development of these receivers, some of them that they've brought in, whether it's, freshmen or transfers, you finally have a little bit of height. We're talking about, and you're going to have some speed. The competition at the receiver position, Fred Moore and Samaj Morgan, they may be penciled in as starters, but that doesn't mean that's how it's even going to be when they start spring ball. Doesn't mean how it's going to be when they end spring ball or start fall camp. There's a lot of talent in that room, and it's up to Coach Bellamy and anybody else that's making those decisions to figure out who are our best receivers, who do we want to give opportunity to, because that opportunity is there. Kendrick Bell is a guy that we saw and talked about last year during the games as an individual. Ronnie's little brother. He's not so little anymore, and is a guy that's going to get some run. He's going to get some opportunity. And Amorion Walker, we saw, what was it, the opening of the Washington game, wide open and speed to burn. It's, can we finally capitalize on some of those routes and some of those opportunities? Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about a room that may not be the most talented in the country, but could be, obviously much more productive than we saw of anything last year.
Time for number 5 on our 7 from 77 as we preview the Wolverines offensive depth chart as we approach spring football. Boy, the smash mentality, you talked about it earlier with the receivers. Yeah, there's a desire to throw more, but boy, this running back group is talented. We saw Jordan Marshall, his 100-yard day against Alabama down in Florida in the ReliaQuest Bowl. Benjamin Hall, certainly a tough runner, a guy who I think has a great opportunity to contribute in 2025. Combine that with the Alabama transfer, former 5-star Justice Haynes. He is dripping with talent, good metrics in a small sample size in his first 2 seasons in Tuscaloosa. What do you have your eyes on, and how can we try to glean what this running back rotation room will look like? Because as wide open as the wide receiver room feels like in terms of unproven talent in a lot of ways, I think we've got some at least proven talent, proven production over the course of the long haul, over 12, hopefully 16 games over the course of the season. That's to be determined. But talent, this might be the most talented room in the roster, offense or defense.
It very well could be, and a lot of it will be determined in the spring. With the new offense and new schemes, new terminology. How well do they adjust to it? Jordan Marshall, we saw him in the bowl game, and we talked about him all season long. Even when he was hurt, we couldn't wait for him to be back. And during the season, we saw him mostly as a returner. Like his mentality, he is aggressive. He's hard nosed, and I'll bring it up again. The comparisons that have been made between him and Blake Corum about not just his playing style and his ability, but his leadership. That's the type of guys that are going to always rise to the top. And you bring in competition like a Justice Haynes, and you mentioned it, small sample size to be able to glean as to what he can be here at Michigan going into his third year. But in the transfer portal, you kind of always, you're a few years away from being a 5-star recruit. And so you can't necessarily rely on what you were, what the projection was at that time. But when you hit the portal, how in demand are you? And Justice Haynes was in demand by everyone. Everyone wanted a chance that Justice Haynes would land on their roster. Michigan landed him. And now you throw in Ben Hall. The one thing I do like about these guys is ball security. They have, and we talk about Blake Corum, the fact that you can be trusted with the ball at any moment, at any time of the game, in any situation. Jordan Marshall showed it in some of his brief opportunity last year. Justice Haynes, in a brief opportunity, has shown it. Ben Hall has been made very aware of what the program means, and that's the football.
Number 6 on our 7 from 77. We've buried the lead long enough. Let's talk quarterback, of course. Bryce Underwood, top recruit in the nation. Your impressions on how he has acclimated to Ann Arbor, the program, the staff, all of that, and what will be some of the key pivot points, observations, things you're going to be watching. We're not going to know how this all shakes out for August 30th against New Mexico for quite some time, but what are some of the things you want to see from him in the short to medium term?
Leadership. And it's leadership at that position. You've got to have it on the football field. You've got to have command of the huddle. And even if you're not huddling, I know nobody huddles up anymore, but you got to have command of the offense while you're on the field. And you've got to have the respective guys. And for each of these guys, it can be a little bit different, right? Davis Warren coming off the ACL, don't know when he's going to be ready. And he's going to give great perspective at some of the meeting rooms, at practice. He's got some experience on the field. He'll be able to share with Mikey Keene. He'll be able to share with Bryce Underwood. But for Mikey Keene, he's coming in with, a lot of starts under his belt. He comes in with experience, and but he's new to the program. How does he handle inserting himself into this team and ingratiating himself into the offense, the program, that room? Talking and communicating with the offensive line, and it's going to be the same thing with Bryce Underwood. It's going to be a little bit different though, because Mikey Keene is just older, right? And there's also this a little bit amount of respect for guys that have had time on the field. Not that Bryce won't have it. For Bryce, it's all going to be about don't come in and push yourself on the offense. Don't come in and push yourself on guys that have been here for 3, 4, 5 years. Just go out there and play. Let your play show. Let your work ethic show. Let your decision, let everything that you do on the field show what you can do. And then by the time the season comes around, now you can start being a little bit more vocal. You could start exerting yourself in a number of different ways, which is going to be different than a Mikey Keene, simply because you're talking about an 18-year-old versus a 22-year-old. And you call it right or wrong in any situation, doesn't matter. I'm telling you how it works in football, and you've got to go out there and prove it. So for Bryce, my advice to him, and what I've seen so far, he's not forcing himself on the receivers. What he can say, though, is, hey, let's go out and run. You want to run some routes? I want to throw some. And those guys, all of a sudden, hey, this guy wants to work. He wants to be able to develop a chemistry with us. We got to get this terminology down. We got to talk about, things that how he likes to deliver a ball. He's also got to learn what are the best way that Fred Moore likes to catch a go route, and how talk through different defenses, get in the meeting room, all of those different things. And he doesn't have to say a word. It's simply be a sponge, absorb everything. And then when the time is right, and it's going to be a little bit different at different times of the year for different players, that's when you start to get some of that respect from your teammates because you've shown the work, you put in the time, you put in the effort. Now all of a sudden things start to switch, and he will be able to be that leader on the field next year if that's the direction that Sherrone Moore decides to go.
So along those lines, here on number 7 of this 7 from 77, you mentioned Mikey Keene, the transfer from Fresno State, who we saw in week 1 last year. Second year for Jaden Davis, who was a pretty highly touted recruit. And then, of course, Davis Warren coming off the ACL injury. Great to see him at a basketball game a couple of weeks ago. So that progress is happening. Evolution of that quarterback room. How does everybody kind of challenge for that spot? And do you believe at this stage, with obviously plenty of opportunity to change your opinion, because this is much more prognosticating, I'd say guessing, than anything else? Do you feel like it's Bryce Underwood's to lose, or is this wide open?
It's wide open. And if I'm Sherrone Moore, if I'm Chip Lindsey, I probably start the depth chart off in terms of seniority, and not just who's been here, but I would say Mikey Keene, hey, go out there, take the first team, because you got to be able to get some good reps, and you don't want to have some of those freshman mistakes happen because you're still trying to develop the offensive line. You're trying to develop the running game. You're trying to develop the receivers, and you work your way down from there. We know Davis Warren probably won't be on the field for spring ball. Jaden Davis, you're next in. And I want to see how Bryce Underwood handles being in that situation. I want to watch his body language. I want to watch how he fights to be able to move up the depth chart. What's he willing to do, and what's he willing to go through? Because he went from the number 1 recruit in the country to now competing for the starting quarterback position at the University of Michigan. There's a lot of people throwing a lot of positive things his way, and a lot of platitudes and a lot of great comments. You've got to be able to go from that to competing for a position, earning a position. It's not just going to be given to you. And, by the end of spring ball, it might be Bryce Underwood's. By halfway through spring ball, it might be so obvious that, Brian, you or I could make that decision. But that's going to be up to Sherrone Moore, this offensive staff, as to when they want to and how they want to handle the depth chart.
So in total, obviously last year Michigan's offense had some rough patches. How optimistic are you that this offense can take the type of leap that will be needed for the Wolverines to go from certainly a great finish to the year, but not necessarily because of the offense, to the type of offense that will be required? You watch those games in the college football playoff, and teams that didn't advance could still have some pretty darn good offensive performances. And obviously it was required, even if you needed a good defense too. So what level of optimism do you have for this offense being able to take one step's probably not enough?
No, you're going to have to take many, many steps forward. And I mean, fall camp is such a long ways away right now. And in terms of just, football years, it feels like it's years away, even though it's only 6-7 months. But there's so much work to be done between now and then. And what I want to see from this offense as they start spring ball is just the ability to attack a defense in a number of different ways. We know that this is going to be an offense that can run the ball. That's part of that's in the DNA of Michigan football. But how do they use that to set up the play action? How do they use that to set up a short passing game, to take some shots downfield and to get more time for the quarterback? That's really where they're going to take a lot of steps forward in just being an offense that, hey, it's first down. We could throw the ball. We could actually complete a pass, a forward pass. It is allowed in today's football. And when I look at it, this is an opportunity with Mikey Keene, Jaden Davis, and I'm going to leave Davis Warren out of it right now just simply because of the injury, but obviously with Bryce Underwood, where you've got some mobility at that position. You might need it at times with the young, inexperienced offensive line. I mentioned the talent. Yeah, they're going to be able to make up for some mistakes, but there's going to be some things that happen. Sometimes it's going to hit the fan. And how does Mikey Keene react? And he's had the experience to it, but then you take a guy like a Bryce Underwood, how does he react? And I saw him play in high school football. He's a guy that is very confident what he can do. His skill set is better than anybody that we have, but it's about being able to take that skill set from the high school game to the college game and being able to still play with that confidence. And when things break down, what type of decisions do you make? When do you run it? When do you throw it? Where are you throwing the ball to? Who are you looking for? We talked about the tight ends. That's going to be a great outlet. That's going to be something that he's going to have to get comfortable with. But you do have the ability to have a quarterback that can run the football, be a threat. You've got the ability to be a quarterback that can extend plays when everything goes to hell. You also have in these quarterbacks guys that can throw the ball downfield in a rhythm passing attack. So just to be able to be versatile in how you attack a defense is going to be by default better than we saw last year. Now, how good they are in the passing game, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some protection. It's going to take, a lot of things. How good are they in the run game? You don't just roll the helmets out, roll the balls out and say, hey, we're going to average 5 yards a carry. When you have inexperience up front and you have new combinations, what are the 5 guys that give Michigan the best opportunity to be good up front, whether it's in protection or the run game? All of those things are going to be worked out. But I do think when I look at the talent, even though there's a lack of experience and certainly a lack of experience wearing the Michigan helmet, there's a lot of work to be done. But I am excited, and I do think that they take a number of steps forward going into this fall.
And let's face it, John, there is not that 5-game kind of easing into the schedule in terms of no travel. Michigan does not play back-to-back weeks at home all year in 2025. Week 2, they go on the road to Oklahoma. League play, there will be a conference road game before the end of September. So Michigan's defense was able to pack up and do certainly well outside of the second half against Washington, and then at Illinois. Again, that wasn't really necessarily defense. Offense, though, you got to get going quickly. You get one quote-unquote tune-up before it's week 2 on the road in a hostile environment.
Yeah, and I really like the way this schedule sets out for a number of different reasons. Selfishly, we won't have a back-to-back tailgate, so we get a little bit of time off. You travel with young kids at home. I'll get full nights of sleep. At least I can guarantee one of those every other weekend. So selfishly, very excited about it. But for the team, you mentioned that tune-up. You'll get a tune-up, and then I don't think there's anybody looking at it going, Oklahoma is a world beater, right? But it is an environment that will be a hostile environment. It is one where their coach, we talked about it last week or the week before, Brett Venables is going to be calling the defense, very experienced at that, and he knows his job is on the line. He wants to save his job. What are some of those red letter games that he is going to have on the schedule? Certainly it's going to be Oklahoma, and I don't know what the rest of their schedule looks like. Texas, but Michigan, his first opportunity to set a tone for his program in 2025 is going to be the winged helmet coming to Norman, Oklahoma. And I love that for all of the inexperienced players that we are talking about, because you're going to have other games throughout the course of the season where the environment may not be as hostile as it will in Norman, but the teams are going to be better. So I'm no way going to say Oklahoma is a tune-up, but I'm glad we have a tune-up going to Oklahoma, and it's going to be a great experience, a learning experience for this young team.
Yeah, Oklahoma starts week 1 with an FCS team, Illinois State. So that will be a pretty vanilla game plan, a vanilla play call set up for Coach Venables in Oklahoma. You would assume a lot of unique wrinkles and a lot that Michigan will have to be able to adjust and adapt to on the fly September the 6th in Norman. All right, that's it for the audio version of In the Trenches presented by Meyer. We talked about the fact we've got a lot coming for you this week and beyond, so stay tuned here on M Go Blue podcasts. On the video side of things, we've got a few more topics to get to. We certainly want to take any questions or comments. Thankful for all those who are joining us live here on this Tuesday morning, soon to be afternoon. We say hello to our friends Jamie and Scott. Scott, indeed, we'll see you out at Chrysler here tonight. It is a maze out. If you're coming out to Chrysler, wear your maze, be loud, because I'll tell you, Mackey Arena, the first meeting was loud as heck, and unfortunately, it wasn't all that rambunctious in the second half because the game was over. So a great opportunity for Michigan. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, John. I wanted your Super Bowl takeaways, and most importantly, first, how did the bacon bombs turn out?
Oh, the bacon bombs were exquisite. And I mean, I try and find different ways to describe them. This year, I didn't do one of the things I mentioned last week about mixing the jalapenos in with the cream cheese. I like having a whole slice of jalapeno. That way I get to make sure I keep all the seeds in there and it's nice and spicy. But I did go with thick cut bacon this year, and it held it together so much better. I had almost no leakage of the cream cheese. It was fully contained. And so they turned out.
Edge, John.
What's that?
Way to set the edge.
Oh, hey, if you're not getting better, all right, you're ready to die. And I am always trying to find ways to get better. So if there's anybody out there who thinks that they have found a way to improve on the Jansen bacon bombs, I'm open to suggestions. I will try almost anything, and see how it treats me.
My wife and I went over to Meijer on Sunday morning. She made a few goodies for the Super Bowl party we went to, including Oreo balls, which was a suggestion from and a recipe from one of her coworkers. And it was awesome. I'll have to get the recipe. Maybe we can flash it on the screen later in the spring. But yeah, they were awesome. The food was better than the game, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
Food was really good, but you want it to be kind of 1A, 1B.
Yeah, and talking about the food, I had chicken wings, had the bacon bombs, had a few dips here and there. Had my wife made a slow roast in the crock pot that we ended up shredding to make into beef tacos. I literally ate from about 8:30 in the morning until just after halftime. And I think my first meal since then will not be until later tonight. I just haven't needed to eat since Sunday.
I've always been a person who, if there is food around, I'm just going to. Well, I mean, it would be impolite if I didn't have a little bit. But certainly on the Super Bowl, that was the case. And then when you're sitting there and it's
a blowout,
and 24-0, and what 30 was it 31-0 before Kansas City scored? I think that was about where it was at. Yeah, it's easy to just pop over there and get another bacon bomb or Oreo ball or whatever it might be. It was it was certainly surprising. I think we both agreed that the Eagles had the better roster in totality, but for it to be that significant, I think it shocked everybody.
Well, it did. And it was, one of the things I talked about last week was the Kansas City offensive line. And I didn't think that the front four for Philly would dominate them the way that they did. But, Thuney, their left tackle, it's not a left tackle. He was out there and he was the MVP of their team throughout the season, but he just is not a left tackle. Taylor, their right tackle, I've never been a big fan of his. I think he is very limited in what he offers that team. And both Super Bowls that Kansas City has lost with Patrick Mahomes as a quarterback, what's been the number one theme? It's been Patrick Mahomes under duress the entire game. And he wasn't even under duress in this one. He was under siege in this one because he didn't have time to escape the pocket. Remember the Tampa game against Tom? And it was about how far that Patrick Mahomes had run. And I don't know if, Kansas City's game plan was, hey, you need to stay in the pocket, deliver the ball. But there was no exit lanes. There was no exit route. There was no exit strategy for him to be able to get out, because whether it was Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and we all saw Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat may have been the guy that was the biggest beneficiary of that game because he is a free agent after that game. And that's the last opportunity. 31 other teams had a chance to see him. 2.5 sacks. I think he made himself some money. How about Zach Bond? A guy that was a special teamer and had his hand in the dirt. All of a sudden, he goes to Philly to make him a linebacker, and he's an all-pro in 1 year. Like the performances that they had, and for it to all come together in the Super Bowl. You're talking about 4 guys up front that absolutely dominated. They were backed up by, Zach Bond and the rest of those linebackers. And then the secondary, they had a hell of a day too. Cooper DeJean, we talked to about him a year ago at Iowa. Now he's a guy that is, a pick 6 in the Super Bowl. They were hitting on all cylinders when it mattered most, because that's not the Philadelphia team. Even though they were good throughout the course of the season, I don't think anybody had seen that Philadelphia team through 17 games of the regular season and 2 other playoff games.
They almost lost to the Rams in the divisional round.
Yeah.
Now, I know I'm not saying that it should have happened, but it very well could have. I mean, the Rams had the ball. It was close. This was within range. And then just how well they played against the Commanders, then against the Chiefs. And to me, the most mind-boggling thing, and we've talked about this, I've said it as such, that outside of having a star quarterback, the best life hack, football hack you can have is rushing with 4, is getting pressure with 4 and being able to drop 7. And the Eagles did not send a single blitz the entire game. And yet, if you just watch, if you could eliminate from your screen the other 21 players on the field when it's Chiefs offense versus Eagles defense, and you just watch what Patrick Mahomes is doing, you would have guessed that they blitzed on every play, and they blitzed on none.
The ability to get home with 4. And we talked about it last year when Michigan played Oregon. We talked about it when Michigan was going to play Ohio State. With the talent that both of those teams had, even Texas, you've got to be able to win up front. And it comes down to one-on-one matchups. And I don't care what game, I'm still talking about football, but I don't care what game it is that you're talking about, or if it's at the college level, the high school level, or the pro level. If you can win more one-on-one matchups than anybody else, you're going to win the game. And that's what we saw with Philly up front. It was 4-on-5, and Philly's 4 was greater than Kansas City's 5. Because Patrick Mahomes didn't even have the first 2 sacks that they had on back-to-back plays. It was like, what just happened? Like, he didn't even have time to hit his 5th step, and he was already under pressure and then sacked. And that is, everybody wants to know what the recipe is for defeating a mobile quarterback. Well, you hit him hard, you hit him often, and you never let him out of the pocket.
100%. I would have loved to have heard Tom Brady's real thought if someone pinged in his ear the producer and said, "Hey, Tom, why don't you break down the Brady versus Mahomes debate after this?"
Greatest of all time. Yeah.
Because that was Mahomes' chance to do something that Brady and no one in the Super Bowl era had done, and that's win 3. And I certainly thought Mahomes played better in the Bucs loss than this. There were a few throws in particular. I felt that second interception was one he would have loved to have had back.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're chasing greatness, when you're chasing the GOAT, you need to find arguments that exceed the ceiling of the current GOAT. And obviously no chance at a head-to-head win in the Super Bowl, 2 losses to Brady in the playoffs. Plus, now you take away the fact that, hey, they both have, won 2 in a row before, but neither have won 3. And Mahomes, I'd be very surprised in a sport where it's easy to say, oh, they'll be back, but then they don't ever get back because it's really hard. I'd be surprised if this were Patrick Mahomes' last Super Bowl. But I do think the Eagles, especially defensively, you see what it will likely require, and that's a lot of changes to your personnel to get back. Because it's a year-to-year league, especially when you have so many good players and so much talent, and there's only so much money that can go around.
Yeah, there is. But I mean, Howie Roseman is one of the best, if not the best, current general manager in professional football. His ability, since he's been there, now he's got 2 decades worth of experience. And, locally here, we always compare him to Brad Holmes. Brad Holmes is going on year 5, and he hasn't been forced with a decision that he may have now about trading for a dominant edge or a game changer. And he hasn't gone out in free agency and gotten those game changers where you look and you say, okay, how do they get A.J. Brown? Well, they traded a number 1 pick. They got A.J. Brown and they bring him in. And then all of a sudden in free agency, they go get Saquon Barkley. They really added to their team this year. Now, can Saquon stay that healthy for 2 years in a row? He wasn't able to do it with the Giants. Doesn't mean he can't now, because the offensive line is one of the best offensive lines in all of football. But he has done, and I think he followed the basics of football of building that Eagles team. How do you do it? You build with the offensive and defensive lines, and those are the 2 units that absolutely dominated on Sunday.
Before we get into the basketball preview, Scott asking about Benny Patterson, one of the incoming freshmen, Indiana product, 6'2", 240. He's listed a 4-star recruit. Not sure if you know a ton about his game, but he's listed as a defensive lineman right now on that roster. There's still a lot. There hasn't been a whole lot of field work for the incoming freshmen, even the early enrollees necessarily, but Any thoughts on him if you have any?
Freshman, rookie, go out and show it. And until you put the helmet on, until you put the pads on, and I get a chance to see you on the field, you're just another guy working out in the gym. And that's how I treated freshmen. And it's not a matter of disrespect, but I mentioned it with Bryce Underwood. Saw what he did in high school. Does that translate to the college game? It should, but it doesn't always. And so I need to see it during spring ball. We'll need to see it next year. When pads are on and they're in fall camp, can he be a guy, Benny, that will be able to, compete throughout all of training camp and be there for the first game? Will he get some opportunity? Again, I don't know. We'll find out. Freshmen aren't ones that I normally spend too much time commenting on.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little basketball here before we get to tonight, 7:00, Michigan and Purdue. What are your thoughts going into this, John? I know you're locked in on Michigan basketball.
Well, I have a couple of questions before I get to my thoughts about Michigan Purdue.
Yeah.
We saw Michigan against Indiana, and we know that Dusty May was born in Terre Haute, Indiana. We know that he started his coaching career under the guidance of one Bob Knight in Bloomington. And I do know that when he took the court, now you could tell me how much you heard, but the Indiana Hoosier faithful did give him a round of applause. He wins down there. And we also know they're going to be looking for a head coach. What can you tell us about the stability of the head coaching job at the University of Michigan? Will it be Dusty May in 2026?
Well, yeah, he did get a heck of a round of applause, and Indiana obviously is a basketball hungry state program. I mean, who knows truly, right? I don't know the answer.
Not the answer we're looking for,
Brian.
Brian.
Want me to call him and ask him? Coach, so I know you're getting ready for this chance to take over first place in the Big Ten. But what I will say is this. Very few people have acclimated as well to the Michigan culture as Dusty May. We hear a lot about a Michigan man, a Michigan woman. Dusty came in as a quote-unquote outsider, yet he has always had those types of characteristics that you would feel like would fit here. And I again, who knows? Indiana's got donors, they got money, they got all of that. I really don't think it's something to be concerned with. I really don't. I think what I appreciate about Dusty is that he truly does appreciate where he came from. And there is no denying that him learning under Bob Knight, learning at Indiana is a big reason why he is where he is.
Sure.
But he loved FAU. And I don't think there's any I don't think anybody in the college basketball sphere believed that Mike Woodson came into this season that we're in right now with a cold seat, right? It was medium warmth, hot, steaming, depending on who you asked. So if it really was all that important, may he wanted to have waited another year. There's no sure thing. I don't know. But what I will say is this. I don't think most people thought Dusty May was going to choose Michigan last year when there were other opportunities, namely Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a great opportunity for there to be continued dialogue between the school and Dusty to figure out a way to, hey, let's keep pushing this forward. To go from 8-24 to playing for a first place spot in the Big Ten tonight is massive. That's a huge, huge turnaround. This Michigan team has a chance to triple its win total from last year by the season's end.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to make sure that it continues. And hey, I've always talked about Dusty being very intentional. I think he's intentional about showering praise and thankfulness toward those who helped him get here. And it's also to say, hey, I like it. I also appreciate Indiana. That was a very intentional, business-like approach. So we all know how this goes. He's going to be rumored until some other news comes out or another head coach is hired at Indiana. Dusty May's not the only big name that Indiana can try to go after. Certainly, I'm sure Brad Stevens is already on the phone. He's probably already looking for homes in the greater Bloomington area because, that's just what, hey, he's the big name, right? He's a big fish. People were hoping Brad Stevens might be looking for an Ann Arbor home this time last year. So things happen. I know it's a long, rambling response.
I was going to say a lot of words.
Sure. Yeah. Well, hey, let's go back to your offensive line breakdown.
Yeah, it's a good point. But I will ask you this as well. Now, this is getting into the weeds of it a little bit, but in today's business of college athletics, and we make no bones about it, it's a business, right? You got the transfer portal, you got NIL, you have revenue share. Who knows what happens? We'll hear on April 7 whether or not that the House settlement is passed or not. But I would even argue right now, because of the commitment that some of the collectives have made towards Michigan, and with the commitment the athletic department has made to Dusty May, the commitment that they have made to revenue share and how some of those numbers are going to break down, I think we also need to look at what quote unquote blue blood programs are anymore in terms of, Indiana is certainly a blue blood program, but I'm not sure that job is as good as it once was. One, because of the pressure. And I also don't know, and I don't, know the intricacies or inner workings of their collectives. I don't know that they're going to have the same amount of money to spend year in, year out as some other programs. And that, again, how the House settlement works, how NILs look moving forward. We've tried to decipher that. We're going to have Ward Manuel on Conquering Heroes throughout the month of April to, talk more about where Michigan is going with this. But I just, again, a lot of words to say, I'm not sure that the Indiana job is as special as it once was.
So they certainly haven't been a blue blood program in terms of production, but
right.
The counter argument to that is, look at what Indiana's fan base was able to draw up in year one of a head coach for football and what they were able to get out of the transfer portal and what they accomplished this past year. And that is a basketball. There aren't many basketball first areas of the country in college. Indiana is still one of them. There is absolutely that passion. So the reality is, I think we're always going to have an ebbing and flowing of who is most motivated in the NIL side. And a lot of it is fundraising. And certainly, hey, Dusty May going to Michigan donors, Dusty May going to Indiana donors, Dusty May going to insert big time program donors. I don't think Dusty May will be, if this keeps going the way that it is, and it's very early, right? I mean, Michigan could lose tonight by 15 and we're going, well, it's just not quite ready for the big time or whatever. Like, this is, if a few 4-point games go differently, then we might not be having this discussion. Things can change quickly. Well, but I do think that Indiana, like Michigan, like 15 to 20 other programs in college basketball, have the ability, the infrastructure, the passion of the fan base to be top 3 in NIL. That doesn't mean they're going to be that way every year. I think it's very similar to recruiting where, Michigan's always going to be in that realm. Some years it's 6, some years it's 19, some years it's 4. Like, it ebbs and flows and depends on the passion of it. Indiana's a sleeping giant, period, full stop. That place is, because if somebody said to you, 10 years ago with Michigan football, it had been a while since Michigan had truly contended, you would have said, yes, but the potential's there. And of course, and we've seen it. We've seen it come to fruition over the last 3 years. I firmly believe that's the case with Indiana basketball. It's tougher now. The Big Ten's more loaded. And the biggest issue Indiana basketball has is the problem that Michigan has at 7:02 tonight. Purdue's a top 5 program in the country. And what they've built, the sustainability of it, the fact that they keep guys, Purdue's not the number 1 NIL place in the country, yet they got the National Player of the Year to come back last year, and he won it again. And then they've been able to keep these guys, re-rack, play a different style, and they're number 7 in the country. That might be the biggest issue that Indiana has, because Purdue's turned into a power.
Yeah, they have. Matt Painter's done a tremendous job. So let's talk about tonight. And I'm curious, how does Michigan go from getting spanked down in West Lafayette to a 1.5 to 2.5 point favorite in Ann Arbor? And we're talking about 3 weeks late.
I really can't believe that line. Hey, they got big buildings in Vegas, so I hope they're right. But isn't that crazy?
It's that when I saw that this morning, I thought, wow, like I'm missing something. So I came to the expert, the guy that I have a chance to talk to that knows most about Michigan basketball. And I'm just curious, we talk about venues in the Big Ten, and a lot of times we're talking about the football venues, but arenas in the Big Ten. And I've heard it from guys that have played. Now, most of my experience is obviously in Chrysler, and I know what that can be when it's rocking and rolling. How difficult are the Big Ten venues, and do they really make that big of a difference when you talk about going to play at Mackey Arena versus playing at Chrysler Center?
Mackey is the #1 home court advantage in the Big Ten. I feel very strongly in saying that. And when you invite the crowd to roar the way that Michigan did in the first 5-6 minutes of that game, that's going to be what happens. It was quiet in the second half because the game was decided. And where the Purdue-Michigan matchup is so scary from a Michigan side is that it's well publicized. Our buddy Michael Cohen had a great story about how Michigan is top 20 KenPom in efficiency, and they're the only team to do that and be this bad in turnovers. I mean, Michigan is below 300 in turnovers. They have been for a long, long time this season. Purdue is one of the best. Braden Smith is the top, I think he's 6th in the country in steals per game. He is elite in that category. I think he's the best. He might be the best guard in the country. I mean, he's phenomenal. So that's where it's scary. The bullish side for Michigan is I think Trey Donaldson, how he has grown, how he has matured, how he has improved from that game to now is outstanding. Trey had his worst game of the year and at Purdue. 1 assist, season high, 6 turnovers. Since then, he single-handedly got Michigan past Penn State 3 days later. And Dusty May said after the game Saturday that his first half was his best half of the season. He was fantastic. It was 14 points, 4 boards, 3 assists. Trey Donaldson playing an F game at Mackey, you got no shot, and we saw it. Trey Donaldson playing an A- game at Chrysler. Not saying that's worth 27 points, but it's worth double digits. It is a massive difference. Plus, you throw in the wrinkles that will be inevitable, right? Michigan will. They've got smart coaches. They're going to do stuff different there. But I think the single biggest thing is, how do you ensure that the Trey Donaldson Braden Smith matchup it doesn't have to favor Michigan. If Michigan can play the point guards to a tie, I like their chances 2 through 5. We didn't get to really see what the 4-5 pick and roll, the Area 51 duo could do against Purdue because the game was over before they had any chance to really settle it and get going. So, I think we'll learn a lot about Trey Donaldson's improvement and everything he has done from the end of that Purdue game to now has been exactly what this team needed to do, because he had some brash comments leading into the first matchup against Purdue. And I asked him, I don't love doing it after games, but I felt it was important because of what was looming to ask him, what's your excitement level for Tuesday? He said, no comment. I'll see you all Tuesday night. And that right there showed me the maturity improvement. And listen, he's a confident dude, and he should be. He's a really good player. And as much talk as there's been about Danny Wolf in NBA circles, Trey Donaldson's a future NBA guy in some way, shape, or form. I really believe it, because that type of dynamic approach, his guard play, all of that, I really like where his game is. And I think he's learning. What I think Michigan football did really well here as of late, they do their talking after games, after they get the job done, and then for 6 days they're back in the lab. They're back practicing, film study, working. Trey has really impressed me in the last couple of weeks, and this is the, there was 2 weeks of classes. This is another final exam, because Purdue is the best team in the Big Ten until they're knocked off, and Braden Smith's the best. I think he's the best player in the Big Ten until he's beaten several times.
Yeah, and this is an exciting 4-game stretch. I think if you look at Indiana, and anytime you get a chance to beat Indiana down in Assembly Hall, that's a good win, and that was fun. And now you've got Purdue at home. You're on the road to Ohio State. I don't care what sport. I don't care where it is. You play Ohio State, and there's going to be some emotion involved. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then obviously the big rivalry in basketball is always going to be Michigan State. We get a chance to play them twice, but this 4-game stretch of Indiana, Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan State, I think will really tell a lot about where Dusty May's team is.
And look at Purdue. Their next 3, Purdue is here tonight, home against Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has the full week off. They don't play midweek. And then at Michigan State. So credit the Big Ten. I credit the Big Ten for believing Michigan after an 8-24 season felt like they'd still be in big games down the stretch because they held off one Purdue, both Michigan State, the Illinois and Maryland games, which are both at home, which will be big down the stretch. So yeah, it's going to be a fun one. You got a prediction before we get out of here?
Yeah, my prediction is Michigan. Come on, Michigan by 3.
Okay. All right. Well, 3 or 4. If they're going to win, it's going to be either 3 or 4 points. It's such a strong magnetic force that Anthony Leal's 60-something foot 3 had to go in at the end of that game because it had to be a 3 or 4 point win.
Right. And I will tell you this. I think my prediction is that Michigan gets up by 11 or 12. They go on a nice run. And then that lead gets down to about 1. And then they get up by another maybe 7 or 8. And then that lead is gone, and maybe they're down by 3. Then the final minutes of the game, they hit their free throws. They do what they're supposed to do, and they come away with a 3-point win.
Way to go out on a limb with that. Are we talking? Is this last week's? Is this am I playing? Is this AI Jansen?
Every game that they've played.
I'll leave this stat. It's pretty remarkable. Michigan has not trailed in the second half since the possession where Donaldson hit the go-ahead 3, the step back against Penn State. They have led for 60 out of 60 potential minutes, or sorry, they haven't trailed because there have been a couple ties. Yeah. But in the last 3 second halves, they have not trailed, and they've won by no more than 4 points in any of the games. So, I will say this: it's going to be a heck of a lot closer than 27. I think both teams will lead in the second half, and I think we're going to have a really, really fun night at Chrysler. So, can't wait for it. We'll have a Defend the Block episode on the audio feed of MGO Blue Podcasts shortly after the 7:02 tip for Michigan and Purdue. And again, we got some really fun stuff coming up on the podcast, so we'll be bringing you all of that. So for Jon, I'm Brian. Go Blue tonight. Wear maize if you're coming out, and we'll talk soon.